Hey, Tony. I think you're on mute, if I see correctly.
Okay, how about now? Good?
Crystal clear. It's
All right,
good to see you.
Good to see you too.
How's it?
How are things?
Things are going well here in New York City. No complaints. Is everything going all right on the West Coast?
Yes, we are. Bay Area is getting into the turn towards the fall, but yeah, it's still pleasant out here.
Awesome. Well, I think we have maybe a few seconds here to let people join. I am Gavin, US Manager at Humand. So this Hutalks is beyond point solution. So I think to start, at Humand, we believe that HR processes shouldn't just exist. They should be designed with intention, built to align with strategy and built to help organizations scale and stay aligned in fast-moving environments. But here's the reality that we've come to. Too many companies are weighed down by siloed tools, rigid workflows, slow innovation, and employees are left bouncing between disconnected systems, frustrated and disengaged. So the opportunity and the reason why we're here today in this Hutalks is an integration and consolidation. So when enterprise tools actually work together, employee experience becomes one seamless, intuitive home for everything that they need. And human resources leaders gain the agility to innovate, collaborate across functions, and accelerate growth instead of being held back by the very systems that are meant to support them. So today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Tony Deblauwe. Tony is a seasoned human resources leader with more than 20 years of experience shaping people strategies at Silicon Valley's most high growth companies. I think that Tony brings a rare balance of theory and practice. He holds a master's degree in organizational development, human resources, and he scaled human resource functions both in scrappy startups and global enterprises. So that means that he's seen firsthand what really works, what doesn't, in both fast-paced and high-growth environments. So Tony's recognized as a thought leader, really sharing his insights in workplace dynamics, motivation, AI, burnout, and human resource innovation across the board. And as an avid AI product developer, Tony brings a forward-thinking perspective that blends human resource expertise and cutting-edge technology. So lastly, I'd say Tony brings, and most importantly, he's a true advocate for moving human resources forward, balancing the realities of legacy systems with the need for flexibility and innovation. So we're going to stop for questions at the end. There's a bit of a delay in our live streaming here, so we'll save our questions for the end. But Tony and I want to hear from you all what you think about the topic. So please feel free to contribute in the chats. So Tony, thank you for joining.
Gavin, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So I think that with your background in mind, we can start off with just simply common mistakes. So what are the most common mistakes companies make, when designing their human resources workflows?
Yeah, I think just to give a little bit of context before I answer that is, I've always been frustrated with the tools that I've been, given, so to speak, whether it's HR, recruiting. It always seemed like the solution was designed by the company, but not necessarily designed for my experience. So it becomes this hatchet job, trying to get the systems to talk to each other. Before the days we've had, there's more tools today to try to do integrations, but it's still very lacking. It's not easy. It's expensive. So you still end up not getting, where you want to be. So that's the state of technologies, but it's really the problems start with you don't have a plan.
Yeah.
A lot of times when you think about an HRIS investment, it's, well, we have to have payroll, we have to have the core employee data structure, org charts, that kind of thing. And oftentimes that's it, right? It's a data warehousing type of thing. But when you start to build it out from there, maybe there's a performance system included. Maybe there's some light recruiting in there if you're trying to go to an all-in-one system. But you haven't really thought through how it's used. What is the user experience, not just as an HR administrator, but to your customer, right? To the employees, to the managers. And so there's a rush to get something, especially if you're in a startup where you're all in, manual processes, to something, and that something's a little bit better, and then you layer on from there. But this is then over time where you get into these problems where you've made all these investments, but it still doesn't do exactly what you want. So I always encourage people, really think through not just the core needs, like, data integrity, data security. Of course, that's critical, but what is it going to do? How is it going to be used? How is it going to be used 100 headcount from now? Like really thinking at least a little bit about that so that you can say, okay, we're at phase 1. Phase 3, when we're at 100 heads, it should be doing this. So it's taking that step back and thinking more broadly in the initial planning, which is usually where you can avoid some of those mistakes that hit you later on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you bring up a really good point of planning for the future and really what that can look like today as well as in the future. So I think as far as the second question goes, how do you balance standardized processes with, the need for flexibility across a business or an organization? It ties into our first question.
Yeah. Well, it is always a delicate balance, right? Because the HR focus is trying to create standard processes, like, for example, a pay change, title change, manager change. Like, there's certain things that we want to have, pretty much baked, that these are the steps, this is what's involved to go from inquiry to, completion of task. But a lot of companies don't work that way, especially in startups. There's a lot of duct tape and bubble gum and paper clips for quite a while. You're still largely manual. And so I think it's this broader conversation that I always think through, which is you need to streamline a process, whether it's manual or tech enabled. And this is where a lot of people fall short. So the business, oftentimes, rightly or wrongly, will dictate a certain process. That could be, again, how we recruit, how we onboard, and often the HR reaction is, well, we're missing a step, we're missing this. Maybe we're right up on the borderline of it being compliant and so forth. Please use this process that we baked. And there's nothing wrong with the process. And certainly there is that compliance component, but the business doesn't want to use it. So you have to ask yourself, okay, what's going on with the user experience, right? Yes, sometimes the business user is lazy, or they put up a wall just for the sake of it because HR told them something, right? So there's nothing wrong with the process, but you still have to look at, well, right or wrong, again, there is a user experience that I have to overcome.
Mhm.
And it could be all done in a system. It might be a blend of system and manual, but just that's where the flexibility comes in. When you think about how HR is branded in an organization, you have to be saying, like, look, these are the tools we're going to give you, automated or not. These are the tools we give you. This is why we're giving them to you. And showing that you're willing to really handhold people through these things a few times early on really makes a difference for how you go forward. Now, enterprise is different. Enterprise will say, look, we've got 10,000 people. We're not going to walk through anything. Like, this is this is what we've decided, and you're going to follow it. Yes, understood. But I think that there's still ways to be a good HR support, to explain at scale. There are certain trade-offs that we have to make.
Mm.
This process has to do these things for these reasons. But here are things that we could do slightly differently. And that's when you start to get into add-on tools. So you've got your core HRIS, and then you start to play with the add-on apps, like some people do for performance, compensation, org survey design, that kind of stuff. So there's different ways we can do that, but HR has to still think about the experience and be willing to flex as the company needs and scales.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Tony. I think that, I mean, in your world compared, to mine, right? Like admins workflows and processes on the back end, I don't think really need to change. But what I focus on is the end user experience. Like, how do we actually guarantee that there is engagement on the HR processes that you send out to the end user? And what I'm finding is that doesn't live within an HRIS engagement add-on. It comes from an integrated experience layer for the end user. And that's how we support our clients. We provide that engagement layer. So then on the back end as admins, HR leaders can keep their workflows and their processes the same, but we surface the engagement and those processes for the end user, in one mobile friendly solution. So that's a great point, Tony. I think that we're pretty aligned there. I mean, speaking of keeping workflows the same, in your legacy tools, I think that so many HR leaders feel stuck in those tools that they've chosen years ago. What are the signs it's time to rethink, integrate, or replace those legacy tools?
It's I was going to give you an honest answer. The level of complaints, and I don't necessarily mean by the customer, but the HR team.
Mm.
You know, a lot of times the issue is, you've outgrown the tools, and not just necessarily by headcount, but by sophistication. In the early days when you're building something that doesn't exist, again, speaking from the startup side, you feel like you've got a lot of flexibility to get core stuff built, better experiences because you're not in spreadsheets anymore. And that's in itself a huge advancement, right? But then the needs of the business change, go-to-market strategies change, which eventually trickle down to what does HR have to serve up to ensure that we're keeping pace with those changes. Again, this could be organizational modeling goes from flat to deeper layers of hierarchy. You have more jobs that you have to manage. Your comp bands start to expand. I mean, there's a whole lot of business scale changes that need to be reflected somehow in the workflow of the HR tech stack, certainly, and process stack. And so what ends up happening is you just band-aid things. So it's very hard to get unstuck because maybe you have a contractual obligation. A lot of these HR systems, they kind of force you to a 3-year agreement right up front. You may not be ready for all that it can do. And so then you're barely putting process around it. You've got a small lean team, so you can't, you don't have a dedicated HRIS team. Like there's a whole host of reasons why what started off good and served the purpose at one point was neglected. And now everybody's not satisfied. And so you're feeling between cost, internal resources to manage a change and transition, and then still not really clear on what are we building towards. People just make do with what they have, put band-aids on it. And you'll see, interestingly enough, where a team or an organization went away, or at least they thought, from heavy manual, spreadsheets, docs, and they came back to it like 3 years after an HR system, because again, they couldn't reconcile the pacing of the change of the business, new requirements, new needs, new expectations, cost, capacity, all those things just kind of crashed into each other. So they say, forget it. We're just going to, do this thing that we're being asked to do offline in a spreadsheet and just go back to manual processes to get some task done. It's maddening, but it's something that, I think is fairly common.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the dispersed systems as well, I feel like they're all over the place.
Yeah.
And, on that point, how can we and how can you encourage adoption of new HR processes, when admins and employees are kind of resistant to change?
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably cliche now to say it's data. The way I approach things is everything's a business pitch. HR is no different, right? It's not just the thing a lot of companies get wrong is the recruiting and the HR operations balance. So a lot of times they think, well, I'll have a big recruiting team. We'll add 100 heads, but we're going to still have the same 2 people in ops. And it's like, no, you need to think about capacity with the ops team as you start to pace, your headcount. And it's through that you start to have data. That data could be all over the place. It could be onboarding experiences. It could be surveys. It could be delays in getting things done. There's a whole host of macro and micro data points that you could say, look, to run the business, to provide a good experience, these are the things that we need. One of those may be headcount in the HR team, but the other side is capability. And here's where we don't have these capabilities. So therefore, if we want to have a better experience, if we don't have these delays, if we don't have all these things we've amassed, this is the solution or solutions that we have to look at in order to change that. And here's what it's going to take to stand it up, cost-wise, people hands-on wise, etc. And I think it's difficult for many HR folks to do that level of analysis, or they're afraid in the face of a CFO or a COO or whatever to present it in that way. But trust me, if you can distill things down into a simple pitch deck and say, this is the problem, this is what we're solving for, this is why we know what the problem is, the evidence we have, and here is some research that we've done about how that would change. And through that conversation, I tell people, your storytelling narrative has to be at an all-time high, because it's like anything in sales, right? You're selling the emotion first, not the logic. So even with an engineering or technical type, right, there is an emotional reaction that they get. They had a bad experience with open enrollment. They had a bad experience with a performance process or recruiting, whatever it is. They experienced something. They got angry about it, typically frustrated, right? And
Yeah.
so then they go down this path of, HR this, HR that. And so it's like, okay, well, I need to be able to create a story for you that incorporates that emotionalness of, I want to solve that thing with you too. It frustrates me too as an HR professional. Here are things that I've noticed. Here's other feedback and data points that I have. And great news, I have a path forward. Let's talk about that, right? And then it starts to get into sort of the logistics of how much of a pain point is this for you? And that's when you start putting dollars and cents and time and stuff against it. But I found I've been much more effective with that than simply saying logically we're having these problems, right? It's not that logic doesn't work. It's that it doesn't work as effectively as zeroing in on something that bothered you, or something from your downline team that was raised up bothered you, that became an HR issue, and trying to address it in that way. So that's how I think you can influence to pitch a better HR solution.
Absolutely. And I think that, when oftentimes employees can be resistant to change, what I try to preach is that it's so important to meet employees where they already are. And with Humand, all of our customers are completely, and their employees are completely already engaged in the product. So I think that engagement leads to action in HR processes. And, we're seeing less resistance from employees, when their HR leaders want to implement change. So that was a great point, Tony. Thank you. Um, you know, a big topic right now is, the first steps. Like, what are the first steps towards consolidation of tech stack across businesses? So, for those organizations with patchwork of disconnected human resources tools, what is the first step to move forward towards consolidation?
Yeah. I look at that simply as, and it's really just a design exercise, right? When I've been in situations where I'm replacing HR tools, adding HR tools, it's no different than any other sort of mind mapping type of thing. Where is the center of this thing, and then where does it ultimately end? You're designing this broader piece. You can use that. You can say, well, let's follow the data. Okay, so from this, where does the data originate from? Okay, so let's take an example, right? So I want to build an experience, and I always think in terms of experiences, not, if I can't think of the experience, what the user is going to have, or my own HR team is going to have, it's very difficult to do that in sort of a abstract way. No, it's not abstract. We're going to feel it. There's going to be administrative pain. There's going to be user pain. So I have to think of it as an experience. But so let's say the experience is I want to be able to take a candidate and move that person from the ATS, assuming the ATS is separate, and I want to move them into a new hire record, and I want to go from new hire record to kicking off provisioning for IT, payroll, etc. Typically, the payroll and HRIS they'll see the same thing, but let's just say. So I need to set off a series of processes so that this person's day one, all this has happened, right? That's what I want the experience for me to be, that it's a seamless process. Then I say, okay, what does the candidate see? Are they basically just, hey, you've been hired, and then we're not going to talk to you for 2 weeks until day one? Okay, is that acceptable? Okay, maybe not. Maybe we want to do something there. Maybe it's not a system issue. Maybe it's the manager reaching out, right? So it's looking at this broader design and starting to see how all the parts fit together to ensure that the experience that we put at the top of the board, so to speak, we want to go from this to there. The data needs to start here and end there, right? What are all of the things involved to make that happen, both in a system and not in a system, right? Because we're talking, email, maybe there's Slack, like there's other things involved than just the core HR tools. So it takes a bit of time, but that's how I start to look at understanding where are the gaps. Do we not have a tool that can do this? Okay, why? Or maybe we can't afford it right now. Okay, so that's going to be a manual process. Do we have a process for that manual process, right? So you start to really outline all of those specific things so that I can turn around and say, okay, in order for me to satisfy this experience and to follow the data, these are the things that I need to do.
Yeah.
And you visualize it, and you actually draw circles and squares and triangles, all of that sort of diagrammy stuff. And from there, then you say, okay, now I have to convince the business that to do these two things, which are critical to this experience, which is the feedback that I already have, or that it's the experience I already know, we need $20,000. If we don't, the risks are the following. And then, of course, you win some, you lose some, of course, like the business, will say, okay, we can give you the 20K now or not. But at least, guess what? Even if they tell me no, even if in this brilliant plan, option one, with all this work that the team did to create the diagram and everything, they still say no, I've at least mapped all this work out. I still know that's the experience we need to get to. Maybe it won't be this year, but I still have it all mapped out. So now I can look to the team and say, okay, we tried. We have the data. We have the emotional experience because we know what we're trying to build towards. What can we do right now in this phase? And guess what? I can build KPIs, OKRs, personal goals, all kinds of things. So to me, it's always a net win-win. Where I don't get that is when the anxiety and the panic is done to make a business buy decision around, well, the CEO said we need to have an org software tool. We need to do a survey. Okay, well, let's get SurveyMonkey, for instance. Well, why? Or let's do Culture Amp. Well, hold on. You're choosing a solution before you even understand what the ask was and what the experience needs to be. So I think if you always stop yourself and say, well, hold on, I need to understand, I need to do two things. I need to know what the experience is. I need to be able to follow the data from origination to end deliverable data. It moves the business forward. Like I need to know what that is and talk through it first before we do anything about shopping or evaluating RFP. Like none of that can happen until we take that step back. And it's frustrating for a lot of people because they're like very action oriented. Well, I know this is what we need. I'm sure it could end up being still the solution we choose, but we're so far from the solution, and we're going to look bad, and HR's brand's going to go down the drain if we are too hasty for the sake of throwing something together and then we don't know all of these parameters. So I've learned that over the years because I was that person, right?
Yeah.
I that very plucky, oh, you want a performance management tool? Great. Let me go do an RFP on the 3 top ones, find out how much it costs, blah, blah, blah. It has all the features I'm sure that we need. And then I go to implement it arduously because I never had much of a team. I was always a scrappy team. And then suddenly the questions about, well, does it do this? No. Well, how come it can't do this? Why doesn't it talk to here? Why doesn't it talk to there? I'm like, oh, but I thought you wanted a tool. I delivered you the tool. What's the problem? Yeah, but it doesn't do all these things. And then it dies after 2 years because the business changed and doesn't integrate. Oh, uh, okay. So then the team is doing manual reports, playing with the data to deliver what the business now needs. So
Yeah.
I've got, again, 20,000, 30,000, sometimes more investment that should have automated things, should have made my life and my HR team's life easier, and it didn't. And I think all of that I learned over time came from follow the data, what is the experience? And that's changed me tremendously over the
Yeah.
years.
Most definitely. And I think that, I mean, to your point, in leading into the next question, like those first steps are following the data, figuring out where there's opportunity for impact, whether that's this year or next year. But I also feel like if you're, looking to solve for a specific problem, the point that you made about does it integrate? Is it just another siloed tool that we're adding on to our tech stack? And what we believe in is absolute consolidation and integration. So employees have one place to go for everything related to human resources and the company that they're working for. So,
Yeah, well, I've told you this, I think, Gavin, when we were talking earlier, prepping for this uh, webinar, was I am not a fan of closed HR architecture systems. I hate it with a passion. And I've had to deal with it most of my career. And I think now that's changed a lot. I think that the more tools you have that are closed, that don't talk to each other, or it's a patchwork of, you know, acquired solutions that don't talk to each other. It's not, built from the ground up, but it's just not thought through. I mean, I feel like did they even talk to HR people when they designed this thing?
yeah,
Like, it doesn't feel like they did. And I've seen this all the time where, especially in enterprise, and I understand enterprise is a different animal. I mean, obviously I've been in enterprise, but I understand it's a different animal than startup. But it's just, I feel like people have just accepted, well, this is how it works. This is how it is. I said, but you're spending some on, depending on what tool you have, you could be spending $250,000 or more SaaS spend on these tools. And you're just accepting that you're still doing 25, 30% manual work on something that was promised to take a lot of that stuff out. That you shouldn't accept that, though. But see, you start to get into this whole world of, well, but I've got this constraint with staff. I've got this constraint with the budget. I've got this constraint. So we stop to think about the broader fix, and we start to micro fix what we've got. Like we're
yeah,
somehow forever imprisoned with this buy decision forever and ever and ever and ever. And I think for those people who are on the call who are HR business partners, it's particularly maddening if you're an enterprise and you're an HRBP, because you're kind of being given the tools by the HRIS team. And unless there's a really good relationship where you, as an HRBP, as the customer to the HRIS, and you're working with features and roadmaps and workflow design and all these things, if you have a great relationship, you can find a way around some of the limitations of the license that you have or the architecture you're dealing with. Um, but I've noticed a lot of people, they abandon that, and then the HRBP is going to their client group and saying, I'm sorry, this is just the way it works. I know we hate blah 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 tool or this or that. An HRS team is saying the same thing, like, well, this is what we got, and I've never understood that. So I kind of trace it back to the software, the vendors. Like,
Yeah.
what are you actually doing to understand the landscape that all of the HR functions operate in, and work harder at making sure that modules that you have inside your application, but also talking to outside applications, because again, you're always going to have some element of that, with open APIs, and embracing some of these technologies that just make it easier for your customer to expand in whatever direction that they want. And I think that that's been the case for a long time. I think it's still the case for a lot of tools. And I say, like, with AI, yes, AI, I mean, let's not misunderstand AI. AI is not going to be, for instance, the magic fix that, I always use the term, you sprinkle AI pixie dust over a bad integration, and somehow the AI will figure it all out, right? So, as I said, I think at the end of the day, as you scale, you want to be able to have as much predictability in a lot of these sort of core workflows as possible. And I said, by core, I mean, a lot of the change stuff, comp, title, manager, org, these types of things that tend to repeat a lot, onboarding, right? There's a lot of repeat processes that we should get to a point where it's a great experience. We can follow the data, and it just works, and it evolves, and we're paying attention to it, and it evolves properly over time. But guaranteed within that is the ability for that flexibility in the architecture. So having products that are flexible inside itself, but also sufficiently outside, allows the HR practitioner to be more bold and be more broad in how they're stitching together the experiences and the workflows that they're trying to build.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to your point of legacy HRIS systems being the same, their engagement models or the modules that they launch, really aren't to par. There's, Human included, plenty of incredible tools out there, Human specifically, where we can completely integrate with your HRIS. This becomes your engagement model. And so you could keep your workflows within your HRIS, but guarantee engagement via a better integrated product. So,
and I would say, Gavin, again, I think, again, we kind of come back to, what is core, and then what is expansion. So, and I mean that expansion because people are in different countries, they're in different areas, all that stuff, right? Core is always, what is the core data, right? I think everybody would agree, right? We have to have some agreement on what is the source of truth. And that's, the core employee data. And when I say that, it could be including the ID, right? A lot of challenges with international build outs, if you're using multiple tools. Like, I'll just use one example, ADP. So a lot of people maybe don't realize that if you're in the US and you purchase ADP to do, say, payroll, it's not the same platform per se everywhere else in the world, right? They have to partner through an ADP approved vendor in order for different countries to input time, whatever it is that you're trying to capture, right? And then that ultimately feeds via an employee, I'll call it a profile, into your US system. And of course, you have GDPR, you have all these restrictions, right? So it becomes challenging sometimes to say, well, yeah, I would love to be able to build this workflow or to do these things in this manner, but I've got these international limitations, or I've got other limitations, or some people are in matrixed environments where they have multi orgs, where they have one company and 3 inks, or an LLC or something, and like it affects what can be seen, what cannot be seen. There is never going to be one perfect system for all of those variables. I think most people kind of accept that. So that's why I say, what is your core? So we need, and this is what happens with HQ when you're a US-based company and you've got international, we need to be able to reconcile all headcount anywhere in the world, contractor, part-time, temporary, full-time, it doesn't matter. Somehow that data flow has to get to a source of truth in the US. It can't be a spreadsheet delivered by India. It can't be some other tool that Europe is using and sending over via some report thing. Like, there has to be a way that it's all housed in the system. That becomes focus number one. How much of this broad data, regional data, can we put as what we define as core without violating anything, still being compliant and still having integrity with that data? That's the first solve, and that could be your phase one, even if you've got multiple systems, right? Much easier if you're starting from scratch, but let's say you've got multiple systems. That's it. So let's say you come to, and this exactly happened to me, so I'm talking from a real example, right? So I get 65% of the way there. 65% of the data being compliant, being all those things, makes it into that core data set that I know, okay, I can trust this, I can run the report every day, every night, every week, whatever. Now the next step is, what do I do to get that other information? And I think that's where you start to, again, think in data and experience and workflow. So the data is in a spreadsheet. The experience is someone's pulling it from, say, like Zoho. Let's say if they're in India, that's a common tool over there. They pull it out of Zoho to send it to their US counterpart, who will upload to the system, because let's say in this example, Zoho and ADP don't have an API. They don't have a connection, right? So you'd say, okay, great. Here's what that's going to look like. Every Friday at 5 o'clock, we will receive this report in this manner to feed this core data set, right? So bit by bit, you chunk it back. Is it ideal? No. Is it clean? Yes, because you've put process on the manual and on the other part where an automation cannot exist or doesn't exist. And now we've, sort of said, okay, but at least I can explain it. Again, I know where the data starts. I know where it resides, where it goes to, and I can explain what the experience is to get there. Okay, it's rational, and here's what's involved to make that happen. So I think that those are things that become very, very powerful in how you manage it. And before I say anything further, just to let the audience know, I'm not an HRIS expert. I'm technical, but I always come from the perspective of HR's brand in delivering a high standard of service, all the behind the curtain stuff that we do on an everyday basis. Oftentimes we don't always get recognition for managing all of the spinning plates that we have to deal with, right? It is still our responsibility to make sense of all of those ways that data moves through the organization, how we receive it, what we do with it, the impact that it makes, and whether we have a robust system that's well connected or we have a lot of really good streamlined manual processes. It's our responsibility to drive that vision and to influence people about why it works and why it matters, not just from a compliance perspective, but from a workplace engagement, tools help you do your job perspective. So it's a mindset more than it is oftentimes the technical challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you nailed that one, Tony. Thank you. And I'm just looking at some of our comments here.
Okay.
And it looks like in that we answered a few of the questions, like Thomas's question about standardizing processes over regions and across teams. Dana had a good question that we kind of touched on, but we can circle back at the beginning, which is, what are the most common mistakes companies are making designing HR workflow? So if we could touch on that again really quickly. I
Sure.
know that we did it at the beginning.
But yeah, I can do it in a quick kind of nutshell, is just really understanding what are you building for, right? Just ask that question. And sometimes people think it's obvious. Maybe it is. Sometimes it's not. So let me explain what I mean. When you think about the employee value proposition, the EVP, or the employee experience, okay, you forget sometimes how everything is so interconnected and threaded, right? So career pathing, big one, right?
Mhm.
Most tools do a poor job of career pathing. Let's be honest. Um, you have your job descriptions, maybe you've got your job leveling, but to deliver a portaled employee career path experience where they can go in, they can see they can see what they are, they can click a button and they can say, okay, this is the skills that I have, and so forth. Like a lot of these things have to be custom built, right? They're terrible. But when you think about that, like, what's the experience of career pathing? There's the employee experience, right? I want to learn skills. I want to level up. I want to get a promotion. I want to make more money. So, okay, so there's a lot of things that are attached to that. What is the manager experience of career pathing? Well, I want to make sure I have the best, that I'm coaching them, that I'm developing them, that I'm putting them on the path to be better and better and better, more productive, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so what are you building then? So, what is the workflow for career pathing? One dimension of it is the promotion side. Okay, well, how have you designed readiness? What are the gating factors before it's even gone into the standardized workflow of processing a change? We know what that looks like, right? When all the data is collected, new title, new pay, etc., we know how to chunk that into most standard processes. But all of that work before, what's the experience to grab that data that leads us into that workflow? Does that need to be automated? It could be. I certainly have via survey, right? Hey, manager, how do you know this person's ready? What tools do you have? Do you use Ninebox as an example? Do you use that? Do you have something else? Have I given you a program or a platform to use? Have we done that work? Right? There's a lot of that goes in there. Why is that critical? The way I think about it is because my goal is not to the transaction to satisfy the customer that it's like, hey, HR, I gave you the data, promote this person. I'm happy, they're happy, we're done. My mind is like, well, let's think about this, right? How is this person's promotion affecting the overall skill development assessment of the talent of your team today, 6 months from now, 12 months from now? How is it going to affect recruiting? How does it impact retention? How does it impact our comp bands? Because now we have internal equity problems, perhaps. Or this person has as much experience as this other person that we just promoted them to. So I have to think through all of those scenarios, and all of it comes down to data, justifying what ends up on simple paper as a workflow to create a change in the system around career pathing. So the broader you start to get, I know some people may be saying, well, that's too much involved. I don't have that time. Well, do you have time for someone to get upset, deal with an ER case, deal with turnover, deal with lack of the right skills because you've built too many junior people and you don't have enough senior people? Like, if you're not thinking through those scenarios as you're going into the design between the system, the manual process, whatever you're trying to build, it will catch up to you eventually. And once you start to think through I pull this thread and it goes across all these subjects, it'll start to become second nature, right? You'll start to question these things. And then for those of you who say, well, Tony, the business won't allow me to have that level of of thought. I need to make the change now. Again, great. Let's go back to our design example. If you've written all this stuff out, you can say, okay, here's the agreement, everyone. What we're going to do right now to satisfy this immediate need, that's phase one. But we're working on these other things over time, because guess what? We have to keep evolving the system, and we have to keep evolving our processes. We need to be aware of those things. But absolutely, we will always satisfy our customer and deliver something that works, that's robust, that is compliant, and all of those things, because we're never going to stop thinking about scale and improving process. That to me is really the core of how you get into either starting off a workflow, right, from simple to broad, or trying to make disparate systems start to talk to each other. Well, what is it between these systems that we know we can connect? Why do we want to connect them? What's the impact? And then start to see the gaps, write down the gaps, and basically say, we've got 4 systems. This one's not serving our purposes anymore. This is why. And here's what we want to propose instead, right? So it all comes back to that pulling the thread, broader thinking, but then zeroing past the, well, I built this simple solution, I'm done, to how does that impact these broader initiatives?
Yeah, absolutely. Tony, that was wonderful. I mean, I think that you touched on some super critical points for HR executives and businesses around the world. So thank you for your time. I think that, we both understand that, these HR processes can't just be functional, and they really need to be intentional and aligned with strategy and really built for agility. The old model of siloed tools and rigid workflows is breaking down. And it's time to really rethink how we're going to support people at scale. So thank you for your time. And this has been a wonderful Hutalks.
Thanks, Gavin. Appreciate it.
Of course. And for our audience, I encourage you to go back to your own organizations and ask, are your processes slowing down your employees, or are they helping you grow? So thank you for your time, everyone. Tony, you've been wonderful. And thanks for joining the Hutalks.
Thank you.
I don't know if I got cut off.